The night Selena Rivera was thrown out, thunder rolled like a curse over the cliffs of Monterey. Rain crashed against her face as she stood before the Rivera mansion, pregnant, shaking, and unwelcome. Behind the iron gates, her mother-in-law's voice cut through the storm. "You've taken enough from this family. Leave, and don't come back." The door slammed. The light died. Silence swallowed her. Selena gripped her belly, whispering to the life inside, "We'll be okay." But the lie trembled on her tongue. She drove with no plan, headlights slicing through the storm, every mile taking her further from the life that had already rejected her. When the car finally coughed its last breath on a desolate coastal road, she saw it, through sheets of rain, a mansion standing alone on the hill, its windows glowing like watchful eyes. She hesitated, because sometimes salvation doesn't look safe. The storm was not what broke her. It was the silence before it. To my viewers in the United States, Trinidad and Tobago, Nigeria, the United Kingdom, and Canada, your loyalty, strength, and spirit have built the foundation of this channel. Every view, comment, and share is a heartbeat in this story we're building together. You didn't just keep the channel alive, you kept me alive too. With all my heart, thank you. The Glided Heart Stories creator. Let us now begin our story. Selena Rivera, 28, had lived in silence for months, ever since the day her husband, Ethan Rivera, kissed her goodbye and never came home. The news came wrapped in sympathy and headlines. Business heir dies in private plane crash. For the Rivera family, it was a tragedy. For Selena, it was the end of her world. They had married young, foolishly in love, believing that time and devotion could bridge the canyon between her modest upbringing and his family's empire. His mother, Margaret Rivera, had called her a charity case dressed like a bride. Ethan never let those words reach her, but Selena always felt them lingering like smoke. When Ethan died, the Riveras turned colder. First, they took his name off every company letterhead. Then, they stopped calling. Finally, they told her to leave. "You'll have enough from the insurance," Margaret had said that morning, her tone polished and final. "We need peace now, not reminders." Peace. Selena wanted to scream. But instead, she packed her clothes in silence, one trembling hand over her swollen belly. The baby moved softly, as if sensing her fear. That night, thunder cracked over the Rivera estate. Selena stood in the doorway, soaked by the storm, pleading one last time for compassion. "Please, just until I give birth." Margaret's eyes were stone. "You don't belong here anymore." The door shut, and Selena's life split cleanly in two. The rain blinded her as she drove away from the mansion, headlights flickering like heartbeats on the wet road. Her phone buzzed with missed calls. From no one. She had nowhere to go. The apartment she and Ethan once shared was sold. The friends she'd known were part of his world, not hers. So she drove until the world turned to fog. Until the road narrowed, curling along the cliffs of Monterey. The ocean crashed somewhere below, dark and endless. She was 7 months pregnant, exhausted, running out of gas, and trying not to think. When the car finally stuttered to a stop near a sign half buried in ivy, she almost laughed. It read, "Alden Point, Private Road." She didn't know the name. She just knew the light she saw on the hill looked like hope, or at least shelter. James Alden didn't expect anyone to find his house. That was the point. He had built the mansion years ago, not for grandeur, but for distance. A fortress of glass and stone overlooking the Pacific, perched high enough that even the wind felt lonely. It was where he came to forget. 5 years earlier, he had been everywhere. News covers, investor galas, Forbes lists. Alden Innovations, his technology firm, had changed energy storage forever. But success didn't save him when his wife, Lydia, and their young son died in a car crash while he was on a business trip. The drunk driver lived. His family didn't. Since then, he'd stopped taking interviews, sold most of his company shares, and moved to the cliffs. The house became his penance, a monument to what ambition had cost him. The locals called him the man who lives with ghosts. They weren't wrong. That night, as rain lashed the windows, James was in his study, reading by the fireplace. His watch ticked softly beside a photograph, Lydia smiling, their son holding her hand. He never touched the picture, never dusted it either. Some grief was meant to gather naturally. When the storm knocked the power out, he moved toward the generator room and froze. A sound, a faint creak from the lower hall. He wasn't paranoid. He was precise. And that sound did not belong in his house. James moved silently through the corridor, one hand brushing the wall until he reached the conservatory. The glass panes glowed faintly with lightning. Then he saw her. A woman curled on the floor beside the couch, wrapped in one of his blankets, soaked and trembling. Her dark hair clung to her face. Her breathing was uneven. For a moment, she looked like a ghost herself, fragile, misplaced, impossibly human. "Who are you?" he said quietly. She startled awake, eyes wide with fear. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. My car broke down, the door was open, and..." Her voice faltered. She looked small against the vast room, one hand instinctively on her stomach. "You're pregnant," he said flatly. She nodded. 7 months. "And you thought breaking into a stranger's house was safe?" "I didn't think," she whispered. "I just needed to rest. I'll leave." Lightning flashed. For a moment, the room filled with pale gold. James saw something in her face, fatigue so deep it looked ancient. "Sit down," he said after a pause. "You're not going anywhere in this storm." She hesitated, then sat. He fetched a towel, a blanket, and a mug of tea. She thanked him softly, fingers shaking around the cup. "What's your name?" he asked. "Selina. Selina Rivera." Something flickered in his eyes, just for a second. Recognition, maybe. He'd known Ethan Rivera years ago, back when both their companies were fighting for dominance. But this woman, she wasn't part of that world. He said nothing. "You're safe here tonight," he added simply. "The guest room's down the hall." The night passed slowly. The rain faded to mist, the thunder to memory. Selina lay awake in the guest room, staring at the ceiling beams. For the first time in months, she wasn't crying, but she wasn't at peace either. In another room, James sat at his piano. He played quietly, a song Lydia had loved, the melody filling the empty house with something almost like life. He didn't know that Selina was awake, listening. The music made her think of Ethan, his smile, his promises, his family's rejection. She touched her locket, tracing the edges of the photo inside. When the music stopped, the silence felt heavier than before. At dawn, Selina found James in the kitchen, pouring coffee. The air smelled of salt and rain. He looked up briefly, then gestured toward a plate of fruit and toast. "Eat. You look like you haven't in days." She smiled faintly. "You don't have to. I'm aware." Something in his tone, gentle but controlled, made her obey without argument. After a while, he said, "A mechanic is coming for your car. Until then, stay. You can't drive in your condition." She wanted to refuse. Pride told her to, but exhaustion won. "Thank you," she said softly. He nodded once and turned back to the window, watching the waves crash against the cliffs. "You don't have to thank me," he said, almost to himself. "We all need somewhere to hide once in a while." Selina studied him then, his stillness, his distance, the quiet sorrow he carried like armor. She didn't know what had broken him, only that it was something vast. And for reasons she couldn't explain, she felt less alone. That morning, as the mist lifted and sunlight spilled over the Pacific, Selina stood on the balcony, the mansion rising behind her like a secret kept by the sea. She didn't know who James Alden really was, or why fate had led her to his doorstep. All she knew was that the world had cast her out. And somehow, the storm had brought her home. The days at Alden Point bled together like watercolors, soft mornings, long silences, and the low hum of the ocean beneath the cliffs. For the first time since Ethan's death, Selina Rivera felt suspended between fear and calm, like she was learning to breathe in someone else's world. The mansion itself seemed alive. It breathed through the wind that echoed in its halls, whispered in the slow rhythm of waves below. Each morning, she woke to the sound of piano notes echoing faintly from the east wing, slow, imperfect, achingly human. James Alden didn't talk much. He lived by routine, coffee at 6, phone calls by 7, then hours of silence in his study overlooking the sea. But every evening, as the sun disappeared, he walked the same path. From the library to the cliffs, where he'd stand and stare at the horizon as though waiting for something that never came back. Selina noticed the way his shoulders tensed when the wind picked up, how he always checked his watch but never wore it. It didn't tick. On the 4th morning, she found him in the greenhouse, surrounded by orchids and silence. He was pruning a plant with careful, deliberate movements. For the first time, he looked less like a tycoon and more like a man simply trying to keep something alive. "I didn't expect you to be up this early," he said without looking up. "Couldn't sleep," Selina replied, her voice soft. "I heard the piano again." He paused, then smiled faintly. "I didn't know anyone could hear it from that far. It's beautiful, but sad. Most honest things are." The air between them lingered, not uncomfortable, but filled with something unnamed. She stepped closer to the orchids. "They're beautiful. I didn't know you liked plants." "They're quiet," he said simply. "They don't ask questions." Selina's lips curved. "You don't answer them either." That earned her a look, the kind that was half amusement, half surprise. No one had spoken to him that way in years. "You're different," he said at last. "Because I'm not afraid of you? Because you should be." It wasn't a threat. It was a confession. Later that day, Selina ventured into the library, a cathedral of books that smelled of dust and memory. She traced her fingers along the spines, wondering how many had been read and how many were simply witnesses to solitude. A photograph on the mantel caught her eye. A woman, beautiful, laughing, sunlight in her hair, holding a little boy no older than 5. Their eyes were unmistakable. They were James's. Before she could move, his voice came from the doorway. "You found them." She turned, startled. "I didn't mean to pry." "You didn't. They're always here. I'm the one who keeps pretending they're not." He crossed the room and picked up the frame. For the first time, Selina saw something unguarded in him. Pain, raw and unedited. "My wife, Lydia. My son, Caleb. 5 years ago." The silence stretched. She didn't ask how. The grief in his eyes answered everything. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be. You didn't drive the car." His words fell heavy, brittle. He set the frame down gently, as though touching it too long might shatter what was left of him. If you are still with us, let us know where you are watching from. Comment your thoughts so far. Please don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Let's continue our story. I built this house after they died, he continued. The cliffs were Lydia's favorite place. I thought maybe if I stayed here long enough, the sea would sound like her laughter again. Selina's voice trembled. Does it? He smiled sadly. Not yet. That night, Selina couldn't sleep. The wind howled outside, and memories clawed back. Ethan's last phone call, the way he'd promised he'd be home soon, how his mother blamed her for every moment that followed. She rose, wrapped herself in a blanket, and wandered down to the living room. The moon spilled through the glass walls, painting everything silver. James was there, sitting by the fire, his posture tense. A decanter of whiskey sat half-empty beside him. You should be resting, he said without looking up. You should be sleeping, she countered softly. He smirked. Barely. Touché. After a moment, she sat opposite him, the silence between them filled with the sound of the ocean below. Do you ever stop blaming yourself? She asked quietly. No, he said. You. She looked down, her fingers tightening around the blanket. Ethan's mother thinks I killed him. He was flying home that night because of me. We fought earlier that day. I told him not to bother coming back. Her voice broke. And he didn't. The confession hung in the air like a confession to God. Fragile, irreversible. James looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time, he saw not the intruder from the storm but someone who understood the same kind of ruin. You didn't kill him, he said quietly. And you didn't kill them, she replied. They sat there, the firelight flickering between their eyes, two strangers bound by guilt neither deserved. Over the next week, the rhythm of the mansion shifted. Selina began helping around the house. Small things, tidying the kitchen, organizing books, tending the orchids when James was away. He didn't protest. He watched. She noticed how he always left a window open in his study, no matter how cold. How he kept a second chair across from his desk, always empty, as if waiting for someone. And she noticed the way he looked at her sometimes, not with desire, but with recognition, as if her presence reminded him of a version of himself he thought had died. One afternoon, Selina walked the cliffs alone. The sea was calm, deceptively gentle. Below, waves struck the rocks with muted violence. She closed her eyes and whispered, I'm still here. When she turned, James was standing a few feet away, hands in his pockets, the wind tearing through his hair. You shouldn't be this close to the edge, he said. You live on the edge, she replied. His gaze softened. Maybe that's why I built the fence. She smiled faintly. To keep the world out. To keep myself in. Something shifted then, a shared understanding, quiet and unspoken. He took a slow step closer. You said once that you didn't know where you belonged. I still don't. Maybe belonging isn't a place, he said. Maybe it's a person. Selina's breath caught. The wind roared between them, but neither moved. That evening, she returned to find an envelope on her bedside table, the same neat handwriting as before. I asked my assistant to arrange for your car, but if you choose to stay longer, you're welcome to. No conditions. No signature. Just initials. J.A. Selina held the note for a long time, her heart pounding. Was it pity? Compassion? Or something slowly becoming more dangerous? Hope? The next morning, the peace was shattered. From the kitchen window, Selina saw a black car parked at the end of the private road. Polished, deliberate, expensive. The kind that didn't belong near Solitude. Her stomach twisted. She recognized that car. The Riveras. They had found her. And this time, they hadn't come to beg her back. They'd come to reclaim what they thought was theirs. The unborn heir to Ethan's fortune. The knock came just after noon. It was a sound too polished, too deliberate to belong on this lonely cliffside. 3 sharp raps against the glass of the front door, each one heavy with entitlement. Selina froze mid-step in the hallway, a basket of folded linens in her hands. She already knew who it was before she saw them. The air in her lungs turned to stone. Margaret Rivera stood outside, dry beneath a black umbrella, her hair perfectly arranged, her mouth curved in that familiar expression, the one that had haunted Selina since the night she was cast out. Behind her, Darren Rivera, Ethan's older brother, leaned against the railing of the porch, phone in hand, eyes cold. Selina's heart stuttered. She felt the baby shift inside her, as if sensing danger. "Don't answer," she whispered to herself. But the door opened anyway, not by her hand. James Alden stepped into view. He had been in the study, finishing a call, when he saw the unfamiliar car through the window. He opened the door now, his posture straight, his expression neutral. But his voice carried the quiet authority of a man who was used to owning the room. "Can I help you?" Margaret lowered her umbrella slightly, her gaze flicking past him to the hall where Selina stood frozen. "You can actually. I'm here for my daughter-in-law." "You're what?" James asked evenly. Margaret's chin lifted. "Selina Rivera. I believe she's been staying here." James didn't turn, but Selina could feel the tension radiating from him. She stepped forward, clutching the edge of the linen basket like a shield. "It's all right," she murmured. "I know them." "Unfortunately," Darren added, sliding his phone into his pocket. "You've been hard to find, Selina." "You didn't look that hard," she said quietly. Margaret exhaled, not relief, but disdain. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Disappearing like that. The press noticed. There are rumors. You're carrying my son's child, and you vanish into some stranger's house? You're lucky we came before the police did." James's eyes narrowed slightly. "Police? Don't worry, mister." "Alden," he said. That gave her pause. Recognition flickered in her expression. The name carried weight. "Of course," she said, recovering quickly. "Then you understand what kind of scandal this looks like. A pregnant widow, the Rivera heir's wife, hiding in a man's home. It's indecent." "She's not hiding," James said. His voice was calm, but steel lived beneath it. "She's surviving." Selina wanted to speak, to say something, anything, but her throat had locked. Margaret turned her gaze on her again, sharp enough to cut. "You've embarrassed this family enough. Pack your things. You're coming home." "Home," Selina whispered. "You threw me out." "We were grieving," Margaret said smoothly. "You know how people say things they don't mean." "You meant every word." Darren stepped closer. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Selina. You're about to give birth to a Rivera. This isn't just about you anymore." James spoke before she could. "She's not property," he said, his tone low. "And she's not leaving unless she wants to." Darren turned toward him, jaw tightening. "And who are you to decide that?" "Someone who doesn't tolerate bullying on his doorstep." Margaret's voice went cold. "We'll be back with a lawyer, Mr. Alden." I assure you, this conversation isn't over. It is for today, he replied. He closed the door before she could answer. The echo of it filled the house like thunder. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of the rain returned, steady, indifferent. Selina sank to the floor, pressing a hand to her belly. Her chest felt tight, her breath shallow. James crouched beside her. "Are you all right?" She nodded weakly, tears slipping free despite her best effort. "They won't stop. They think this baby is their legacy. They don't care what happens to me, just the name." "They're not taking you anywhere," he said firmly. "You don't know them, James." "Then I'll learn." His tone was final, not loud, not heroic, just certain. Selina looked at him, searching for the man beneath the armor. "Why are you doing this? You barely know me." He hesitated. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything and have no one believe you deserve to heal." Something broke inside her then, not pain, but the fragile shell she'd built around it. She reached for his hand before she realized she'd done it. He didn't pull away. That night, the mansion felt smaller, the air thick with unspoken worry. Selina tried to sleep but couldn't. Every sound outside made her flinch. When she finally gave up and went downstairs, she found James in his study, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him, the piano silent in the corner. He looked up. "You can't rest either?" She shook her head. "They won't give up. Then they'll have to go through me. That's not your fight. It is now." She studied him, the way his jaw tensed, the exhaustion hidden behind his eyes. "You're risking too much for someone you don't owe." "I thought that once too," he murmured. "Then I lost the people I did owe." A pause. The firelight painted them both in shades of gold and shadow. "You don't have to save me," she said softly. "Maybe I'm not trying to," he replied. "Maybe I'm saving myself." Their eyes met. Something wordless passed between them. Recognition, longing, fear. The next morning, the black car was gone from the cliffs. For now. But James's lawyer, Daniel Cole, arrived instead, tall, sharp, loyal. Over coffee, he reviewed the situation, his expression tight. "They can't legally claim guardianship," Daniel said, glancing between them. "But they can make her life miserable. The press will eat this alive." Selina looked down. "I don't want to be a story." "You already are," James said quietly. "But we'll control the ending." Daniel hesitated. "There's something else." Margaret Rivera's already filed a motion to freeze the trust fund tied to Ethan's estate. If that baby is born under her control. "She won't be," James interrupted. Selina blinked. "She." He smiled faintly. "You said she last night." A flush rose to her cheeks. "I guess I did." "Then she stays here," he said. That evening, Selina walked the halls, touching the walls that had once felt like stone and now felt like shelter. The storm outside had passed, but another brewed quietly within her. Not fear anymore, but something fiercer. When she reached the piano room, James was there, playing the same melody she'd heard her first night. This time, it sounded different, stronger, fuller, alive. She stood by the door, smiling softly. "You're getting better. Maybe I finally have a reason to play." Her heart thudded in her chest. "What changed?" she asked. He looked up, his eyes locking with hers. "You did." The words hung there, delicate, dangerous. That night, Selina dreamed of waves crashing below the cliffs, of light breaking through clouds, of voices calling her name. When she woke, dawn was spilling into her room, the air calm and golden. But peace never lasts. Her phone, dead since the night she left the Riveras, now buzzed to life, connected to the mansion's restored network. A single message appeared on the screen. Unknown number. You think he can protect you? You're still ours. Her hands trembled. She looked out the window toward the sea, and for the first time she saw not safety, but the faint glint of a camera lens hidden in the rocks below. They were watching. The next 48 hours blurred into a single heartbeat. After the message appeared on her phone, Selena Rivera lived between windows and shadows. Every time the wind moved the curtains, she thought she saw movement outside. Every time a car passed on the distant highway, she heard her mother-in-law's voice. James Alden doubled security around the property. New locks, cameras, motion lights. But Selena knew safety wasn't built with metal. It was built with trust, and hers was fraying. That evening, as the sun fell into the ocean, she confronted him in the study. "They know where I am," she said. "If they want to drag me back, they will. You can't fight them forever." He didn't look up from the file he was reading. "I can fight as long as it takes." "Why?" she demanded. "You don't even know me." He raised his eyes, and the exhaustion in them startled her. "Because I couldn't save my family. I won't fail twice." The words cut through the room like lightning. For the first time she understood. Protecting her wasn't about charity, it was atonement. "I'm not your redemption, James," she whispered. "Maybe not," he said. "But you remind me what it feels like to care." Silence. The kind that hurts. That night, rain returned. Soft, deliberate, the kind that sounded like memory. Selena lay awake, listening to the house breathe. The baby kicked once, twice, a gentle reminder that time was moving even if she wasn't. She rose, slipped on her robe, and wandered through the dark halls until she found herself in the piano room. The fire was still burning. The keys gleamed in the half-light. She sat and pressed one note, hesitant, trembling. Then another. A melody she didn't recognize spilled out, fragile but alive. James appeared in the doorway. "You play." "Not really," she said, startled. "Just feeling." He crossed the room slowly. "That's how it starts." He sat beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. Together they filled the silence with sound, two broken rhythms trying to find harmony. When the last chord faded, he whispered, "You make this place feel less dead." Her pulse raced. "And you make me feel less invisible." They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. The moment already waited one. Morning brought intrusion. James's assistant, Daniel, arrived with urgent news. He laid a folder on the table. Court summons, custody filings, public accusations. The Riveras had moved fast. "They've filed for temporary guardianship," Daniel said, "claiming Selena's unfit, mentally unstable, influenced by you." "Influenced?" James echoed, eyes narrowing. "They're spinning this as coercion. A grieving widow under the control of a powerful man." Selena felt the room tilt. "They're using you to get to me." Daniel nodded grimly. "They've already tipped off a reporter." James exhaled slowly. "Then we get ahead of it. I'll issue a statement." "That's what they want," Selena said. "A fight in public. You'll lose everything you've hidden for years. Maybe hiding was the problem." He turned to her. "Do you trust me?" "I don't know," she said honestly. But I want to. He smiled faintly. Then let's start there. That afternoon, Selina stepped outside for the first time in days. The sky had cleared. Gulls wheeled above the cliffs. For a fleeting second, she felt free. Then she saw the reflection of a lens in the rocks below. Paparazzi. Her breath hitched. She ran back inside. They're here. James met her halfway, already reaching for his phone. Daniel, lock down the road. No one gets through. But it was too late. The Riveras lawyer was already walking up the path with two uniformed officers. The confrontation in the foyer was chaos. Voices overlapping, flashes from distant cameras strobing through the glass. Margaret Rivera's tone was all honeyed cruelty. "We only want what's best for her," she told the officers. "You can see the environment she's in. This man has isolated her." James stood tall, fury coiled beneath control. "You're trespassing. Leave before you regret it." The officers hesitated. Legally, they couldn't remove Selina without a warrant. Margaret knew it. She smiled thinly and stepped closer to her. "You think this man will protect you? He's using you. When the world turns on him, he'll disappear, and you'll be the story everyone forgets." Selina's fear gave way to something hotter: anger. "You threw me out when I needed you most," she said. "You called me a disgrace, not a daughter. You don't get to come back now and call it love." Margaret's mask cracked. "You ungrateful. Enough." James's voice thundered through the hall. The officers flinched. The Riveras retreated, promising legal retribution. When the door slammed shut, the silence that followed felt like aftershock. Selina's knees gave out. She sank to the floor, sobbing, not from weakness but from release. James knelt beside her, his hands trembling as he reached for her. "It's over," he said softly. "They won't touch you again." "No," she whispered, meeting his eyes. "It's not over. Not until I stop running." He frowned. "What are you saying?" "I need to face them, on my terms. I won't let them decide who I am or what this child means." James shook his head. "They'll destroy you in court." "Then let them try," she said. "But I won't hide any more." Her resolve frightened him and moved him at once. He saw in her what he'd lost in himself: courage. "If you go back into that storm," he said quietly, "I'm going with you." "Why?" He hesitated, then stepped closer, voice low. "Because somewhere between your fear and mine, I started remembering what living feels like." For a heartbeat, everything stilled: the sea, the wind, the world. Night fell. They packed quietly, preparing to drive into the city for the court hearing the next morning. James loaded the car, his movements precise, while Selina placed a hand over her belly, whispering to the child inside, "We'll be brave." As she turned toward the doorway, a glint caught her eye, a red light blinking faintly from the corner security camera. Then it blinked again. Not the pattern of James's system. Different. Tapped. She felt the blood drain from her face. "James, someone's watching." He followed her gaze, and froze. Dozens of tiny red lights, scattered through the hall, came alive one by one. Hidden cameras. Micro-recorders. Every room was wired. James's voice dropped to a whisper. "They've been inside." Selina backed toward the door, heart pounding. "How long?" "Long enough," he said grimly. "They know everything." Outside, the wind howled against the glass. And somewhere in the distance, a car engine started. The Riveras weren't waiting for court. They were coming now. For a few seconds, the world was nothing but red dots blinking in the dark. Then the power cut. The mansion sank into silence except for the wind clawing at the windows. Selena Rivera felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. Every shadow looked alive. The child inside her shifted, a tiny pulse of fear answering her own. "James! Stay close," he said. His voice was low, steady, the kind of calm that comes from men who've faced chaos before. He grabbed the flashlight from the wall mount, its beam cutting through the black like a blade. The security monitors in the hall were dead. Each screen showed static. Someone had killed the feed from inside. "They must have come while we were upstairs," he muttered. "Professional work. You mean inside the house?" He nodded once. More than once. Selena's pulse roared in her ears. "They watched me. Us." "Not anymore," he said, but she could hear the tremor under his words. He guided her toward the study, his command center. Papers, open folders, and the glowing outline of the generator panel filled the room. James's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up backups, accessing hidden circuits. One by one, the lights flickered back to life. The cameras were gone, every file, every feed, wiped. He slammed the laptop shut, jaw tight. "They've taken everything. Even the recordings I made after they came last week." The Riveras? Or someone working for them. Either way, they want control of the story before tomorrow. Selena pressed a hand to her stomach, trying to steady her breath. "Then we can't stay." James looked at her, something dark flashing behind his eyes. "They'll expect you to run. And if we don't, then they come to finish what they started." Lightning flashed across the windows, lighting his face in quick, silver bursts. He looked older, harder. The man she'd met weeks ago, the one hiding behind silence, was gone. In his place stood someone willing to burn everything down for her. They packed fast. Documents, car keys, the folder Daniel left with the legal filings. The baby kicked again, harder this time, as if reminding her of time running out. Selena tried to hide the pain twisting through her lower back, but James saw it. "You're having contractions," he said. "False ones," she lied. He didn't argue. He simply placed a hand on her shoulder. "We're getting out of here now." They stepped outside. The night air was cold, sharp with the scent of salt and storm. The path to the garage glistened from recent rain. Selena could hear the sea crashing far below, its rhythm faster than her heart. When James opened the car door, a beam of light flared from the trees. Headlights. Another car. "Back inside," he ordered. She obeyed. The headlights grew brighter, then stopped 20 yards away. A black sedan, sleek, deliberate. Doors opened. Two men stepped out, followed by a third silhouette holding an umbrella. Margaret Rivera. Even from a distance, Selena recognized the posture, the control. The matriarch never dirted her hands, but she never came unarmed either. James's voice was a whisper. "They're forcing a confrontation." Selena's throat went dry. "They won't leave without me. Then they won't leave at all." He reached into the side table drawer and pulled out his phone, already dialing Daniel. "Call the police now. Trespassing, harassment, everything. Tell them to come with press if they have to." He turned back to Selena. "We hold until help arrives." The pounding on the door was louder this time. "Selena!" Margaret's voice, smooth but commanding. "You've made a spectacle of yourself. Don't make it worse. Come out, darling." Selina froze by the staircase. Every part of her wanted to shrink, to hide. But another part, the one that had learned to survive storms, began to rise. "She's not your darling," James said through the intercom. "And you're trespassing. We only want to talk." "You don't talk," he snapped. "You take." The seconds stretched. Then glass shattered, one of the rear windows. Footsteps. 2 men were already inside. James pushed Selina behind him. "Go to the safe room down the hall." "No. Do it." She ran, the world narrowing to breath and heartbeat. The house echoed with motion, shouts, scuffling, the crash of furniture. She reached the corridor and pressed the hidden latch behind the painting. The small panic room yawned open, sterile and cold. Then, silence. No footsteps. No voices. Selina hesitated. The silence was worse than the noise. She stepped out again, calling softly, "James?" Nothing. The living room was chaos. Papers scattered, the front door wide open. Wind tore through the curtains. One of the intruders lay on the floor, moaning, a deep cut across his forehead. James stood over him, bleeding from his arm, breathing hard. When he saw her, relief flickered in his face. "You're okay." She moved toward him, but a gunshot cracked through the air. The vase beside her exploded in shards. "Down!" he shouted, dragging her behind the couch. From the doorway, Margaret's voice rang out, steady, cold. "You've turned this into a circus, Selina. Don't make me the villain." "You already are," Selina said, voice shaking but firm. "You broke me once. You won't do it again. That's enough." James's tone cut through the air. "This ends now." He stepped out slowly, hands raised. The bodyguard beside Margaret aimed again, uncertain. "Put it down," James said quietly. "You fire that thing. Every headline tomorrow reads Rivera heir's mother orchestrates assault on pregnant widow. Do you want that?" The man hesitated. Margaret's mask cracked just enough to show fear. Sirens wailed in the distance. Daniel's doing. Blue lights flickered faintly along the highway. Margaret turned toward the sound. For the first time, she looked unsure. "You think this saves you?" she hissed. "The world belongs to people like us." James's gaze was ice. "Then the world needs changing." The police arrived minutes later. Lights flashing, questions flying. The Rivera's lawyer tried to talk, but James's security footage, what little was left, told its own story. Intrusion. Armed entry. Threats. Selina sat on the staircase, wrapped in a blanket, watching it all unfold. She should have been terrified, but instead she felt hollow, as if the fear had burned itself out, leaving something cleaner behind. When the officers finally led Margaret away, the older woman looked back once. For a fleeting second, guilt shimmered through the arrogance. She said nothing. The door closed behind her, and the house was quiet again. James sat beside Selina. His arm was bandaged, his face lined with exhaustion. "It's over," he said softly. She shook her head. "No. It's just beginning." Outside, dawn broke over the ocean, pale gold spilling through the shattered windows. The cliffs glowed like something reborn. Selina leaned her head against his shoulder. "You were right," she whispered. "Sometimes we don't get to hide." He smiled faintly, a sound halfway between relief and disbelief. "You're stronger than anyone I've ever known." She looked at him then, eyes bright with quiet fire. "No. You just reminded me I was." The courthouse smelled of rain and dust, an old building trying to remember justice. Selina sat at the plaintiff's table, hands trembling slightly against the polished wood. The baby had stopped kicking, almost as if sensing the quiet before a verdict. Across the aisle sat Margaret Rivera, wrapped in designer black, her expression carved from pride and denial. It had been 3 weeks since that night on the cliffs. Enough time for bruises to fade, but not enough for peace. James Alden sat beside her, his arms still bandaged, his face unreadable. To the world, he was the mysterious billionaire dragged into a scandal. To her, he was the man who had stayed when everyone else turned away. The judge called the session to order. Cameras were not allowed inside, but Selina could feel the weight of invisible eyes, reporters, whispers, the curious world outside hungry for spectacle. She took a breath. This isn't about them. It's about truth. Her lawyer began by recounting everything: the inheritance dispute, the eviction, the intrusion, the threats. Each word felt like reopening an old wound, but Selina didn't look away. When the photographs were shown, her standing in the rain that night, her suitcase on the steps of the Rivera mansion, she stared straight ahead. Then came Margaret's turn. Her lawyer stood, voice smooth, well-practiced. My client merely acted in concern for her late son's widow and unborn child. Mrs. Rivera was misled by Mr. Alden, a man of immense influence. That's a lie, Selina said suddenly, her voice cutting through the courtroom like glass. Gasps rippled. The judge's gavel struck once. Mrs. Rivera, please remain seated. Selina did, but she didn't stay silent. They didn't act out of concern. They acted out of control. They wanted my child to erase their shame, to rewrite the story of their son's death. I was never family to them. I was property. The lawyer opened his mouth to object, but Margaret's expression shifted, something raw flickering behind her composure. You think I wanted this? She whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. You threw me out in the rain, Selina said. What part of that was love? You reminded me of what I lost, Margaret said, voice trembling. Every time I saw you, I saw Ethan dying again. The courtroom froze. Even her lawyer turned, stunned. For a long moment, there was no sound except the rain tapping against the windows. Then Selina spoke softly. You weren't the only one who lost him. When the judge finally spoke, his tone was firm but weary. Given the evidence, it's clear that the Rivera's actions were coercive, invasive, and unlawful. Custody claims are hereby denied, and restraining orders are to remain in place. Mrs. Rivera, you are ordered to make no further contact. The gavel fell like thunder. Margaret didn't move. Her eyes were distant, the strength drained out of her face. For the first time, she looked small, human. Selina rose slowly, unsure whether to feel victorious or hollow. Justice had been done, but it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like release. As the crowd dispersed, James touched her hand. You did it. She shook her head. We did. He smiled faintly. I only stood beside you. You faced them. You made me believe I could. Their eyes met, and something wordless passed between them, a truth deeper than anything said in court. Outside, the sky was pale with morning light. Reporters swarmed behind the barricades, shouting questions, flashes bursting like small explosions. James guided her through the chaos, one arm shielding her from the crowd. At the car, a microphone was shoved forward. Mr. Alden, are you in a relationship with Mrs. Rivera? James hesitated. Selina turned toward him, unsure. He looked at the reporters, then back at her. "No," he said softly, loud enough for her alone. "Not yet." And then, with quiet defiance, he added, "But I'd be lucky if I were." The flashbulbs went wild. Selina felt her cheeks flush, half from surprise, and half from something warmer, something like hope. Back at the cliffside mansion, the wind was calmer, the sea gentler. Workers were repairing the shattered windows. The scent of new paint and salt filled the air. Selina walked through the halls that had once felt like a cage and now felt like home. Each creak of the floorboard was no longer fear, it was memory. She stopped by the piano. Her fingers hovered above the keys. James joined her quietly, setting down 2 mugs of coffee. "They dropped the charges against your in-laws," he said. She nodded. "I asked them to." He blinked. "You, what?" "I don't want vengeance, James. I just want peace. For me. For the baby." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "That's strength I don't have yet." "You will," she said gently. "When you forgive yourself." He turned away, but she saw the tears he tried to hide. "You think I can?" he asked. "You already have," she said. "By protecting someone else." He laughed softly. "Maybe that's what living is. Learning to protect without losing yourself." "Maybe," she said. "Or maybe it's learning to love again, even after everything breaks." That evening, they sat outside on the terrace, watching the horizon burn gold. The storm had cleared completely, leaving the sea like glass. Selina's hand rested on her stomach. "She'll be here soon," she whispered. I can feel it." James smiled. "What will you name her?" "Grace," she said. "Because that's all that saved me." He looked at her for a long time, then said quietly, "You saved yourself, Selina." For the first time, she believed him. The morning came quietly, like an apology. Sunlight filtered through sheer curtains, scattering soft gold across the cliffside mansion. The air smelled of ocean salt and jasmine. It had been weeks since the court hearing, weeks since the Riveras disappeared from the news. Peace, though fragile, had finally come. But that peace was soon interrupted by the sound of breaking water and a single breathless cry. Selina Rivera was in labor. James Alden nearly tore down his own front door when he heard her shout from the upstairs hall. Within minutes, the quiet house turned into a flurry of motion. Calls to the doctor, towels, boiling water, voices overlapping with panic and tenderness. She was on the bed, pale but calm, eyes locked on the ceiling as waves of pain rolled through her. "You need to breathe," James said, gripping her hand. "I am," she whispered through clenched teeth. "Just not sure it's working." He smiled despite the fear. "You're stronger than this storm." "That line again," she said weakly, a flash of humor even now. "It works," he murmured, brushing damp hair from her forehead. She screamed then, once, twice, the sound primal and fierce. And then it happened, the cry that replaced every shadow with light. The babies. Hours later, the house was quiet again. The storm had passed. Selina lay in bed, exhausted but radiant, the newborn nestled against her chest. The baby's tiny fingers curled around hers as if claiming her. "She's perfect," James said softly, standing beside her. "Grace," Selina whispered. "Her name is Grace." He smiled, eyes glistening. "Grace Alden sounds strong." Selina looked up sharply, surprised. "I didn't mean." "I know," he said gently. "But maybe someday, when she chooses her name, she'll know who stood beside her mother." The moment stretched, two people on the edge of something tender but undefined. Then Grace stirred, breaking the silence with a small whimper. Selina smiled down at her, her heart full in ways she'd never imagined possible. The following days blurred into quiet rhythms, feeding, laughter, and the soft hum of lullabies echoing through the house. James worked in his study but often found excuses to linger by the nursery door. Every time he saw Selina with her child, something inside him softened. He'd lost his family years ago in a car crash, a fact the papers never stopped reminding him of. The guilt had turned his mansion into a mausoleum. But now, for the first time in years, it felt like a home again. One afternoon, he stood by the window watching Selina on the terrace. Grace was asleep in her arms, the sea wind teasing strands of her hair. She looked peaceful, fragile and invincible all at once. "You're staring again," she said, not looking up. "Just making sure this isn't a dream," he replied. "It's real, James. You're allowed to believe it." "I'm learning," he said quietly. "Good," she said. "Because she'll need both of us to believe." He frowned slightly. "Both." She smiled. "You've already been more of a father than anyone else in her world." The words hit him harder than he expected. He turned away, swallowing emotion. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "I'm not," she whispered. "I'm asking you to stay." That night, they had dinner by candlelight. Nothing planned, just two plates, soft laughter, and the sound of the ocean outside. Grace slept nearby in her crib, her tiny breaths blending with the rhythm of the waves. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" Selina asked. "Every day," James said. "And for once, I don't dread it." She smiled faintly. "I used to think my life ended when Ethan died. That everything after that was just survival. And now I think maybe it was only beginning." He reached across the table, taking her hand. Sometimes the end of one life is just the invitation to another. The candlelight flickered between them, painting their faces in soft gold. The tension that had once surrounded them was gone. What remained was quiet, steady warmth. In the weeks that followed, Selina began writing again. Letters to Grace, journals she'd one day give her. In them, she wrote not about pain but about resilience, love, and the courage to begin again. She wrote about the night she lost everything and the morning she found something better. Sometimes she'd find James reading in the nursery, Grace asleep against his chest, his hand resting protectively over her. Those were the moments she wished she could freeze in time. One evening, months later, they took Grace down to the cliff edge. The sun dipped low over the horizon, turning the water to molten gold. Selina carried the baby close, wrapped in a soft blanket. "Do you ever miss the past?" she asked quietly. James shook his head. "The past is just a place we lived long enough to learn from." She smiled. "And what did you learn?" "That love doesn't disappear. It just waits for the right moment to return." Selina looked at him, really looked, and saw not the lonely billionaire who'd saved her, but the man who'd chosen to heal beside her. "You found your reason again," she said softly. "No," he whispered, eyes on her. "You found it for me." They stood in silence, the baby stirring between them. A gust of wind carried the scent of sea salt and renewal. "Look at her," Selina said. "She's already everything we weren't brave enough to be." James smiled, his voice a murmur against the wind. "Then maybe she's the proof that even broken stories can end beautifully." As the last light slipped beneath the horizon, Selina whispered a prayer, not for revenge or redemption, but gratitude. For the storm that forced her out. For the stranger who took her in. For the love that rebuilt her from ruin. The camera of the world, if it were watching, would see them standing together on that cliff. A mother, a child, and a man learning to live again. The ocean stretched endless before them, the sky burning with promise. And in the softest voice, Selena said, "Sometimes, being thrown out is just the world's way of pushing you where you truly belong." The wind carried the words away, but their meaning lingered. A whisper of healing, a vow of new beginnings. A quiet promise that love, once lost, can always be found again. The house at the edge of the cliffs no longer sounded like sorrow. Wind still moved through its corridors, but now it sang instead of howled. Photographs lined the walls, Selena holding baby Grace, James smiling in the background, the light always warm, always golden. It was strange, she thought, how the same place that once represented fear could become a symbol of peace. The difference wasn't the walls, it was who she'd become inside them. Sometimes, at night, she would wake to the sound of the sea and remember the rain, the night she was thrown out, pregnant, shivering, believing the world had no mercy left. That version of her felt like another lifetime. But she never forgot her, because that was the woman who survived. She would rise from bed, walk to Grace's crib, and whisper softly, "We made it, little one." And every time Grace's tiny fingers wrapped around hers, it felt like forgiveness, for the pain, for the loss, for the years she thought she wasn't enough. James often joined her by the window, his arm brushing hers, both of them watching the waves below. They didn't talk much about the past anymore. Some stories heal better in silence. But one night, as moonlight spilled across the ocean, James spoke quietly. "You ever wonder why it had to hurt so much before it got better?" Selena smiled faintly. "Because sometimes the pain is the only thing strong enough to push us forward." He nodded. "And sometimes it brings us home." She leaned against him, her voice barely a whisper. "We were two broken people trying to save ourselves. We didn't know we'd end up saving each other." Outside, the wind picked up again. No longer the cruel wind of exile, but the restless breath of new beginnings. The sea below roared, eternal and alive. Selena closed her eyes, the echo of that first storm still somewhere in her memory, but now it carried a different meaning. It wasn't the sound of an ending anymore. It was the sound of grace. Some storms don't come to destroy you. They come to clear the path to where you truly belong.